You're listening to the Platform Launchers podcast. I'm John Stange. It's great to have you with us this week because this is where we get together to talk about building and growing and monetizing your online platform. We also talk about taking your passion, turning it into a platform, and helping that become your paycheck. And we try and inspire each and every listener each and every week with some of these ideas that many of us have been working on. And you've heard me say in previous episodes that as I record this podcast and as I record this video for YouTube, right now I'm doing so in front of a robust group of online platform developers that are representing lots of different regions here in the United States and across the ocean as well. And there's a lot of topics that we talk about and a lot of things that we're trying to deliver message-based content around. And it's really exciting to do that. And so if you're a regular listener to the podcast, we're so grateful for the fact that you listen, and we hope that you get some inspiration with what you're personally trying to build. Now, what we're going to be talking about this week is the subject of podcasting. And I just mentioned with our members club, I just mentioned with our live group that this is one of those subjects that I get very excited about. Now, our group already knew that about me. That's not a mystery. I mentioned that podcasting tends to be my favorite element of online platform development, or maybe my sweet spot, the type of thing that I really, really enjoy being highly involved in. And I've been podcasting for a while now. Before I know it, it's going to be a full decade of podcasting. And that's amazing to me because in some ways it feels like I just started. But I want to talk about this week the subject of a tipping point, specifically what we can do when our podcast hits the tipping point. And I don't know if you're listening to this and thinking about starting a podcast at some point. I'm not necessarily saying you have to, but if you do choose to do so, there are some best practices. There are some things you can do that would be helpful to you, especially if you're consistent enough to reach a tipping point with your podcast. And if it gets to a tipping point of growth, I want to suggest some things that'll be useful to you if you get to that spot. Now, in this era of digital media, podcasting continues to grow and it continues to expand in influence. And all sorts of media outlets are starting to notice this. If you haven't noticed this element yet, YouTube has really started to pick up on the influence of podcasts. And you're going to be hearing a lot more in coming weeks from YouTube about how they're going to be promoting podcasts and podcasters and helping them monetize their content, all of that. I think YouTube's going to be a big player in that space. We'll wait and see how they pull this off, but my guess is that they're going to do a good job with it. And one of the most common questions that I often hear from people who are looking to develop their online platform is, should I start a podcast? I hear that all the time. Should I start a podcast? It's become a little bit trendy in some respects. Now, the truth is, I can't really answer that question for you directly, but I can tell you this. Podcasting has had a major impact on everything, literally everything that I'm currently doing. Now, when I first started podcasting, I had hopes that my initial show would catch on. It was the early days of podcasting when I was doing this, and at the time I was speaking a lot about the subject of leadership. I was doing a lot of leadership training at the time, reading a lot of leadership books. In my day-to-day role as a local church pastor, I was exercising leadership. And so I created a podcast that addressed a lot of the topics that I thought would be of benefit to other leaders. And I had a lot of fun doing that. I thought it was very enjoyable. And I learned a lot about podcasting in the process of creating that first show. And then I had the idea to start creating podcasts that were more of an expression of my faith. So to venture from speaking about leadership to faith-related issues. Again, I had no idea if people would enjoy this content or if it wouldn't really be something utilized. But at that time, several months into my podcasting journey, I created a show called the Chapter a Day Audio Bible. And I will admit to you that when I first created that show, it did not gain much traction at first, but then over time, it started to build some momentum. And I'm one of those people who checks my show statistics. Some people say they never check their show statistics, and I certainly get that. If it's discouraging to you, then by all means, don't check it. But I'm one of those people that can be satisfied with incremental progress. And so I would check the show statistics regularly, and every bump in downloads or every new region that the show is being listened in That encouraged me. I loved seeing that. Different states in the United States that were listening, different countries throughout the world that were listening to the podcast. It really encouraged me. And so several years into this process, and keep in mind, it was a daily show that I was producing. So every day I was producing content. But several years into this process, I realized that I was actually getting very close to reaching a total of 1 million downloads. And I have to say, that was a very exciting time. I was super excited to hear that that was a metric that I was just about to reach. And I still remember the day when that milestone was indeed reached. And as grateful as I was to see that happen, I'm just as grateful for what's taken place ever since then, because that moment was a tipping point. It's a very visible tipping point when I look back at the statistics of the show. It's a tipping point that led to exponential growth of literally everything else I was doing online. It helped launch other things. And so the momentum that show was experiencing, it had a very positive impact on my other podcasts. At this point, I host 4 shows. I host this show, the Platform Launchers Podcast, but I also host the Chapter a Day audio Bible. I also host a show called Daily Devotions with Pastor John, and I also host another show called Dwell on These Things. And it started to have a big impact, a very positive impact on my other shows. So that was great. I also noticed that when the Chapter a Day audio Bible hit that tipping point, it had a positive impact on my blog. My blog readership went up. It also impacted speaking opportunities that I was being offered. People would hear things and it would lead them to my website, and they would see some of the training that I offered, and I would get some speaking opportunities. It also led to book publishing opportunities. I had the privilege to publish one of my more recent books, the book Dwell on These Things, with Penguin Random House. They are the biggest publisher in the United States and possibly in the world. And they offered me that book publishing contract because of the podcast downloads I was receiving. That was their main metric. That was their main reason. Reaching a tipping point, it accelerated the pace of growth of just about everything else I was doing in the online space. Now, last year, my shows exceeded 10 million downloads, and the rate of growth, it continues to progress. I don't know the exact number right now, but I know that it's past 11, past that. It just keeps growing. And if you choose to get invested in podcasting, I'm sure that you're doing so partly because it gives you an outlet to speak about your passion. And that's certainly a wonderful thing. But I'm also sure that many of us, or maybe most of us who are listening right now, also have platform ambitions or business ambitions in the back of our minds that we'd like to nurture in cooperation with the growth of our shows. Well, when your podcast hits the tipping point, and by the way, if you're very consistent with it, it's going to hit a tipping point of some point, or of some nature, of some metric. It's going to hit that at some point. And when your podcast hits that tipping point of growth, I'd like you to make the most of that opportunity. When you see that it's finally happened after you've invested ample time and effort in consistently producing your show, I want you to make the most of the opportunity when it hits the tipping point. And I want to suggest a few things that I hope you'll consider, because I think they'll be useful next steps once that tipping point comes. So keep these things in mind. And by the way, I'm very optimistic for you, especially if you're someone who is a very consistent content creator that stays focused on what your listening audience is looking for. I'm optimistic you're going to hit that tipping point. When you do hit the tipping point, here's a few things I hope you'll do. First of all, I hope you'll celebrate and analyze your success. So think about both. Celebrate and analyze it. Take a moment just to acknowledge and celebrate your podcast's growth. It took a lot of effort and a lot of thought, probably a lot of dreaming for you to get to that spot. And start reflecting on the factors that you think contributed to the tipping point being reached. Now, again, it may sound a little nerdy. There are a lot of things I think I do that sound a little nerdy, maybe a lot nerdy, but I really would encourage you to analyze your data. So look at things like your download numbers. Look at your listener demographics. Look at the overall feedback that you're starting to get from people who listen to the show, and gain some insights into what's working well for your audience and why they keep listening to your show. But you want to celebrate and analyze your success. I think you should start there. And then from there, I'd encourage you to maybe start considering refining your content strategy. So I think when you have some increased growth, I think it's important to understand what resonates with your audience. You want to start looking for patterns in the episodes that gain the most traction, because that's going to give you some clues into what topics or what formats or even which guests were particularly successful for your particular podcast. And I think you can use that information to refine your content strategy, because then you could start focusing more on producing what your audience actually enjoys. Next, I'd encourage you to do this. After you refine the content strategy, keep in mind that once you hit the tipping point, there are going to be more people listening to your content, and you want to be someone who engages with your audience. As your podcast grows, actively engage with your listeners. I actually received an email just the other day from someone who listens to my show. Maybe she's listening right now, and she said, there are a lot of people in the online space that I've attempted to reach out to in the past, and most of them have so many gatekeepers that I can never actually ask them a question or reach out to them in any way. And she said, I just want to simply thank you for being the type of person who responds to emails. And I thought, you know what? I said to her, well, you're welcome. But I also said, how hard is it to reply to an email? I mean, most people are not so like such a big deal or receiving so many emails that we don't have time to just reply, even if it's just brief. And so that was helpful feedback for me to receive. And I want to encourage you, if you hit a tipping point, do this before you hit a tipping point too. I think it'll help you hit a tipping point, but be someone who responds to comments, be someone who responds to emails. Be someone who responds to social media messages, right? Consider creating even a community around your topic. These can all be useful ways to engage with your audience. And I also think, and I say this from experience, you'll find it a powerful form of motivation and accountability as well. One of the things that I often do is I find it helpful to actually picture the faces of the people that I know who actively listen to my shows. When I'm creating content, I think of those people. And I also think of their faces when I'm tempted to skip a week. I'm like, you know what? If I skip a week, I'm going to hear from so-and-so, or I'm going to have to see so-and-so, check their podcast feed and notice there's no episode there. I've got to, I can't skip the week. I can't skip the week. Engage with your audience. All right. Something else that I'd encourage you to do after you hit that tipping point is become more active in collaborating with other guests and podcasters. If you hit a tipping point, that means you're going to have some influence in the podcasting or space, or in the space related to your specific topic. Leverage your growing influence to collaborate with other people who have online influence. So this could be people that could be really good guests, other podcasters in your niche maybe, but inviting guests who have a following onto your show can expand your reach and help you attract new listeners. It also offers opportunities for you to do some guest appearances on the podcasts of others, and that allows you to introduce your show to new audiences. I actually have the opportunity later this week. I was invited to be a guest on a popular podcast. I'm looking forward to being part of it, and I'm a last-minute substitution for somebody else. There was somebody else that was supposed to be on there, and then they weren't able to do it, and as a last-minute substitution, I was invited to be on there, and I thought, wonderful. And the host of the podcast said, I want to make sure that this is beneficial to you. So make sure you promote your stuff while you're helping me co-host this particular episode. And I thought, what a wonderful trade. And so I want to encourage you, find ways to collaborate, because it's going to help you introduce not only yourself, but also your content to a new audience. And you will find, as your show hits a tipping point, people are going to want to be featured on your show, and they're going to want to gain an audience with your listeners. So just keep that in mind. Something else you might want to do after you hit the tipping point is just start thinking about your production quality from a new perspective, because as your podcast grows, you might want to consider investing in better equipment or better sound editing or better production assistance. I think improving the quality of your podcast is only going to enhance the listening experience for your audience, and it's going to help you maintain a professional image. You want to make sure that your content is good. You want to make it top notch. I think one of the most obvious things that we can do, this is something that I've done multiple times, is that along the way, as my content grows and as I learned about better equipment, I have improved my microphones. I do this every so often. I'll look and I'll see, hey, is there a better microphone that I could be using? Right now, I'm using the Shure MV7. It's not and it's kind of an expensive microphone, but it's not unreasonable, and it works well with a USB interface if you want to keep your interface simple. But I like it. It's a podcast mic. It was basically built for podcasting. I love it. I also like the ATR 2100. That one's a bit more budget friendly, and it's an excellent microphone. And there's lots of good mics, but if you started off your podcast using headphone microphones that came with your iPhone, right? Okay, you started there, and now you built up maybe to the built-in audio that was on your laptop. Okay, that's fine. But then maybe upgrade to an ATR 2100, or maybe upgrade to a Shure MV7, or upgrade to something else. Regardless, upgrade your equipment. You might also find it helpful to upgrade your computer too eventually after your show hits a tipping point. Most likely that means you're going to be bringing in some income, and use that income to upgrade your equipment. A little over a year ago, I upgraded the computer that I use, and it processes audio and video so quickly, it saves me time. It makes my day more efficient than the old computer that I was using. So just keep that in mind. Improve your production quality. There's nothing wrong with doing that. No, something else that I'd encourage you to do if you hit the tipping point is to explore additional monetization opportunities. There's nothing wrong with ethically monetizing your podcast. And if you haven't already considered doing this, think about some of the options that might be a good fit for your podcast. So that could include sponsorships. If your show's really catching on, there are people who probably will want to host some sponsorships on your show, or feature some sponsorships on your show. That's a great opportunity for them to gain exposure and for you to earn some additional income. You might find partnerships are a useful thing where you can help promote other brands and they promote your brand. Crowdfunding, I think, is a wonderful thing. I received a nice note from someone earlier today who participated in some crowdfunding that I made available, and she just thanked me for the content that I produced. I thought that was wonderful. Maybe merchandise sales would be useful for you, or a Patreon membership program. Just be mindful of maintaining a balance between monetization and maintaining the integrity of your content. Never sacrifice the integrity of your content for any of your monetization options, but explore some of these things. I recently signed a deal with a new podcast distribution network that has advertising that's done on my faith-based shows, and they write me now a monthly check to pay for the advertising that's done on there. I am very happy with the arrangement. It works well, and it doesn't damage the integrity of the content that I'm producing. So it's a really good fit. Think about that in your case. Something else you want to do is plan for some scalability. So you want to plan for some continued growth by implementing systems and processes that can help you save time. Excuse me. This is something that I have really been focusing on in the past year. I've been trying to develop more streamlined systems for episode editing in particular. And I noticed that there were a lot of things I was doing that I had to ask myself, why do I keep doing this? This is something I'm doing that makes no qualitative difference to the show. It doesn't improve or detract from the quality of the show, but it certainly takes up my time. And I thought I could streamline this, I could streamline this, and I could streamline this. And it makes it more scalable because I'm able to produce more content in less time because I've identified some time wasters, even simple things like how I was naming and organizing files. Or intros that I could pre-record instead of recording them live. Simple things like that. One other thing that I just encourage you to think of if your show hits a tipping point is just be someone who continues to be a learner, continuously learn and adapt, because the podcast landscape, it continues to change. It's really, even though it's been around for a few years now, it's really in some respects just starting to catch on. And because it's just starting to catch on with some of these larger players, like I mentioned, YouTube, and you've got Apple Podcasts and Spotify that have been part of this landscape for a while. But this landscape keeps changing, right? It keeps developing. There are new things that keep happening all the time. So just stay up with what's happening as far as trends and best practices in the industry. If you get the opportunity to do so, attend different conferences or join podcast communities that allow you to swap ideas. I was just part of a conference call last night with some podcasters. Every year I attend PodFest down in Orlando. It's typically held in the month of January down in Orlando. So if you're ever interested in catching up and meeting down at a PodFest down in Orlando, I'm almost always there, and I usually speak for it. So just be part of those conversations because it helps you to learn and adapt and gain some ideas on what you can do to make your show relevant and help it to continue to grow and just improve its quality. You get ideas from other people who are actively involved in this process. Now, again, let me just say this as we wrap up. Remember that podcasting success, if you're going to succeed in podcasting, remember that this is a journey. This is not something that happens overnight. That's why I always encourage people, if you're going to start a show, don't start something that you're not going to stick with for 3 years, right? If you do it, plan for a 3-year commitment at least to make sure that it's going to work. And after that 3-year period of time, if you're really convinced it's not going to work, all right, then you have my permission, then you have my blessing to give up on your idea. But don't give up on it too soon. Remember, it's a journey. Hitting that tipping point is just a milestone along the way. You want to stay dedicated, you want to be consistent, and really, you want to just stay focused on creating valuable content for the audience that tunes in, because you're not going to hit a tipping point in one day. It takes consistent content creation over the course of time without losing enthusiasm to finally hit the tipping point that you're trying to reach. But I'll tell you what, once you reach it, get ready, because your growth is going to become exponential. And it's going to become the type of thing that really helps launch all the other things you're doing. It'll help you get coaching clients. It'll help you promote the books that you're writing. It'll help you with so many other things of your business if you can stay consistent with a podcast, help it get to that tipping point, and then follow through with some of these things that I'm suggesting in this week's episode. Now, before we finish up, I just want to remind you, as I've done recently, to stop by platformlaunchers.com, where you can download our free 21-day platform development planning guide. We have that available for you there. You've been contemplating some ideas of how to build an online platform and what you can do to help, just accelerate the growth of that platform. Stop by platformlaunchers.com, get the 21-day platform development planning guide. It will save you time, and it'll help you clarify some of your ideas over the course of the next 3 weeks. And we also have another free offer over there for you. You've heard me mention it before, but we let you take a 14-day free test drive of our members club. And if you're a part of our members club, that means you have full access to our online video vault of previous training. And it gives you access to our group. It gives you access to our forums, gives you access to the launch plan course. So much content it gives you access to, but it also gives you access to our community. And we'd encourage you, if you're listening right now or if you're watching us on YouTube, take a test drive of that Members Club membership for 14 days and see over the next couple weeks if it's a good fit for you. And if it is a good fit, we'd certainly love to welcome you to be part of our Members Club. We always welcome new members, and it's always so fun to see what individual personalities and backgrounds bring to our group. We find it highly beneficial and highly encouraging as well. But that's it for us this week. Let me say that again. But that is it for us this week. We're so grateful to have you with us this week, as always. And we look forward to catching up with you again right here next time. Take care.